Welcome back, everyone. My name is Corey. I am the founder of School of Grit, and today I'm going to be breaking down for you some of the logic and the reasoning behind why I got started in real estate, why I started using my VA loan, and the wealth creation as to how real estate works and what I've seen in my experience. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break down this right here. This is your basic mortgage, okay? You get the principal, the interest, the taxes, and the insurance. That's generally wrapped into your mortgage. When you have expenses on a property, you get a mortgage, and generally this is what's in there. Okay, so I'll break these down for you, and I'm gonna use the principal last, okay? So the interest is what the bank charges to give you the loan. So they give you a bunch of money that's not yours, and then they charge interest, and they get that on top of the money that they lent out to you. Right now, rates are somewhere between maybe 6 and 7 or so %. Okay? Taxes are whatever your city, state, area, like your local area is charging. Maybe that could be $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. It could be up to $1,000 in some urban areas, but that is generally wrapped into the mortgage. Additionally, you've got insurance. Usually that's only $100 or so, maybe a little bit more per month. So you will never see these three back. Those are just sunk expenses, what I like to call the price of doing business, okay? The principal you will generally see when you go to refinance or sell the property, generally, okay? And I'll say this now because real estate does not always go up. There are crazy events that happen. There was the 2008 crisis. Real estate goes up and down. But in my experience, and in speaking with lots of other professionals, people that have been doing it way longer than I have, I find it it's not very often that you find a property that is worth less today than it was 30 years ago if it was on a 30-year mortgage. So keep that in mind. So now, let's go into the breakdown of how real estate works and why it is considered a wealth generator. So let's say you buy a single family home and the purchase price of this home is $250,000. You're in a military town and that's about right. You can get a decent single family home, maybe a 2 or 3 bedroom with a 1 or 2 bathroom house right now for about $250,000. Over the course of 30 years, what you're gonna do, what house hacking is that first year that you live in that property, you're gonna pay all of the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and the utilities. But after that first year, you're gonna move out and you're gonna rent that to a tenant. And the goal is, let's say in a vacuum, you're gonna rent that out from year 2 all the way through till year 30, okay? Now, couple of things here. If that property does absolutely nothing, it doesn't go up a single dollar in value. Over time, as you rent that property, your tenants will pay rent, and generally that's going to be more than what your mortgage is. If it's not, I wouldn't recommend buying that specific property if you don't think that the rent is gonna compare, or you can't make enough income off of that to where you would go cash flow negative, but that's a whole other video. And then here on the y-axis, we've got property value, and then x-axis, we've got time. So after that first year, you move out and you either go rent somewhere or you go work on buying another property after that first year. So for those next 29 years, okay, you're renting that property and you're generating income. And the principal, let's say it's $400, usually it's a couple $100 a month, that's factored into that mortgage payment. So you don't see any of this stuff, but you will see your principal, and that goes down to paying down your actual mortgage note. Like this $250,000, very slowly over time, you're gonna pay that down at $400 a month, and let's say over the next 30 years, and these numbers don't necessarily match, this isn't real data, but it's concept. So over time, that is eventually gonna go to 0, and you will have paid off your mortgage. And if this property doesn't go up a single dollar in value after 30 years, 25, 30 years of working and into retirement, you now have an asset that is worth liquid $250,000. So you lived in it the first year, and then the next 29 years, your tenants or your customers or your friends or whoever is going to rent from you, those are the people, because you create the value for owning the property and providing the service. And over time, you're going to pay that down and you're going to be left with $250,000. Okay? Now here's where it starts to get really interesting. And remember what I said before, I don't know personally of any properties that are worth less today than they were 30 years ago. And I'd be willing to bet that 30 years into the future, properties are also still going to be worth more than they are today. So now let's say that you're earning 3% back on your property value, okay? This 3%, if you're using your VA loan, this is actually an infinite return, because both of the VA loan properties that I purchased, the first one I owed $0 down. So I bought my first property at $300,000. I bought it with $0 down. So I put no cash and capital on it as a down payment on that property. And those properties have done well, but let's just say that they didn't do well, and let's say that they got a 3% return. So you're getting 3% back on $250,000, but you put no money down. That is infinite in a vacuum. There's obviously other factors that go into that, but at face value, that is an infinite return, okay? So now let's add all this stuff up and let's go into this formula down here, which is gonna show a general wealth creation and why all of this stuff is relevant, okay? So you're making 3% a year on $250,000. So 3% at $250,000 purchase is $7,500 per year. Additionally, you're paying down your principal each month for a year, and that gets you to $4,800 for that first year or every year after that. And that will get you $4,800 in principal pay down. So you started at $250,000, the property value went up $7,500, and your mortgage note went down $4,800. Additionally, after that first year, so let's talk about year 2, after you lived in it for that first year, you get it rented. And let's say that your mortgage is $1,500 and your rent is $1,700. So now you're cash flowing $200 per month, which is $2,400 a year, and then you come down here. So you get your cash flow at $2,400, your appreciation of 3% at $7,500, and you get your principal pay down at $4,800. That totals to $14,700 each year in realized value. $2,400 of that is, let's say, cash, and then the remainder of that is value and equity that has built up in the property. That's what gives you equity. Principal pay down and appreciation over time. That's where you get your equity in the property. So now let's say that you make $50,000 a year. Okay, that's a pretty good starting salary. You've now replicated 29.4% of your actual annual salary in realized value in the first, let's say, that second year. So after you've lived in the property for the first year, that second year, you've now replicated 29.4%. It's almost a third of your overall income. But you didn't stop working. You're still at $50,000 a year. So you're essentially up 129.4% on generating and creating wealth for you and your family. Last thing I'll say is this is where if you go to cash out a property, let's say that you've worked for 30 years, okay, and you've paid your mortgage down and your property has gone up 2 or 3%, which is basically nothing, year over year for those 30 years, right? And let's say after 30 years, that property has doubled. Now your property value up here is at $500,000. Your mortgage note is down to $0. So your value is $500,000. So the way that you can sell that property is you're going to walk away with $500,000 in theory, because this is still risk. You're essentially starting a small business. There's no way of taking all of the risk out of doing this, but based off of principle and sticking to this general formula and knowledge, this is what allowed me to get out of the military to do the things that I do today. So now you've worked even for 20 years or 30 years, you can still work full time. Now you've just created another asset that when you go to retire, you can now sell that off and live at $500,000. And let's say you need $100,000 a year. If you sell that off, you pay the taxes, let's say, 20%, 25%, you're still walking away with a couple $100,000 for your retirement and for whatever you want to do beyond retirement.